Well, good morning, and thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to speak at this symposium and in such wonderful surroundings. In this presentation, I'll be covering the following: the types of professionals who may work on projects, the key risks that arise from work being carried out, the ways of managing and reducing risks, and finally, I'll describe practical ways of protecting and collections interiors. And before I started my private practice, I used to work for the National Trust in an advisory capacity covering some of these elements. Depending on the type of works being carried out, a whole range of professionals may be involved. The range of professional expertise needed to conserve and repair historic buildings and their interiors is as varied as the range of types of materials and buildings themselves. Professionals may act as consultants, provide advice and write specifications for the work. They may also be practitioners and carry out surveys and prepare condition reports in advance of the work, or they may actually carry out the work themselves. Different professions are distinguished by their professional bodies, codes of ethics, professional standards, and systems of accreditation. In the UK, there is an accreditation scheme for conservators. In order to be accredited, conservators have to demonstrate that they are proficient at their job across a set of published standards. There are conservators who carry out practical conservation treatment and those who specialize in preventive conservation, preventive conservators. Preventive conservators provide care of collections and historic interiors. They have detailed knowledge of emergency procedures and environmental control. They can plan and coordinate the packing and storage of collections or advise on the protection of historic surfaces. Many professionals may be involved in a major project. A typical project team can include surveyors and architects with knowledge of the structure of the building, contractors with specialist skills such as roofers, mechanical and electrical engineers, specialist decorators, conservators and art historians, health and safety consultants, and many others. And for a major project, it may be vital to employ a project manager. For smaller projects, such as the repair and conservation of one sort of material or type of architectural feature, professionals can be managed directly by the museum or historic house manager. Historic buildings and collections are full, as we know, of fragile objects and fragile historic surfaces. There may be beautiful wall coverings, carved staircases, and fine floors, all of which can be easily damaged if work is not carefully managed and measures and procedures put in place to protect them. Large-scale projects may involve major intervention. Here we see images of work being carried out at Stirling Castle in Scotland. A fire suppression system is being installed and extensive structural repairs. Work can be quite intrusive and have a major impact. Earlier this morning, Agnes described the 10 agents of deterioration. And when work is carried out in historic interiors, there's an increased risk of deterioration. There is an increased risk of fire through poor working practices, an increased risk of theft through inadequate security, and items may get moved and lost if not properly recorded. Physical damage can occur through direct impact or vibration, and dust and other particulates can cause abrasion and soiling. So the very nature of the work being carried out can expose collections and interiors to increased risk. Contractors may be careless when carrying out work, such as lifting floorboards. Modern cabling is very inflexible and difficult to install and can easily damage fragile surfaces. Objects may get damaged through poor handling if they need to be moved, and unexpected risks may be encountered during the work. The extent of hazards such as asbestos may not be fully identified until work has actually started. Here we see a room in a historic Tudor building dating from the 16th century, where plasterers have been carrying out repairs. Their attention has been purely on the walls, and the work has created a lot of fine plaster dust. And while they have tried to stop this travelling through the 16th century house, they have used very sticky adhesive tape around the door. The tape is so sticky that the surface of the door will be damaged when the plasterers remove the tape. They have stacked their tools and various pieces of wood against a very fine wooden carved chimney piece. But procedures need to be put in place to stop this kind of bad practice. Risks can be reduced in a number of ways. Firstly, it's really important to provide a clear project brief or specification. You need to choose the professionals carefully and ensure they are fully qualified and experienced enough to carry out the particular job. They should also have the appropriate levels of insurance. You need to financial disasters can be prevented by requesting a fixed quotation or tender for the specified work. Work should be carefully programmed, taking into account the length of time each task will take and the order in which work has to be carried out. There should be scheduled meetings and a clear process for making decisions. Good working practices should be specified and a contract agreed and signed. When planning the work, we need to determine the scale of the work, list the various activities and how long each will take, and you need to ask the professionals who are going to be carrying out the work how long they think it will take. Collections may need to be moved before work can start, and time has to be allowed for this. Objects that can't be moved or historic features such as fireplaces and floors can be protected. Again, this time has to be programmed in, and supervising the work is crucial for a large project. Time may be required for commissioning systems before collections can be returned. Time has to be allowed for cleaning interiors and reinstating collections, and frequently not enough time is allocated for these tasks or for planning the work. At Snows Hill, a National Trust property, where all the contents had to be packed and moved off site, planning began 18 months in advance. Employing the right contractor is absolutely crucial. And for a large project, it's also important to employ a good site agent or clerk of works. Weekly meetings help to make sure things are on track and problems can be quickly identified. Before work starts, an induction can be carried out for the contractors, telling them about the building and the collection and the fragile nature of the historic interiors, and explain just how easily things can be damaged. Contractors' working practices can be specified in the contract in order to restrict dangerous practice. Professionals should be asked to provide method statements for all risky activities, for example, cleaning of stonework. Access routes through a building should be restricted to agreed routes. And if carrying out work which creates dust or dirt, the working practices document can state that this should be kept to a minimum or should be controlled at source. And for small jobs, contractors can be asked to work within a dust tent. That is, a simple timber frame with polythene stapled to it to help contain particulates. Tools should always be placed on protective mats or boards. So protective measures start at the entrance, with the use of additional threshold mats and protective boarding to help control the impact of contractors walking through historic interiors. Tacky mats with a sticky surface can be used at the entrance and exit of rooms where dusty work is taking place, so that dirt is not carried beyond the room. A project conservator will often be employed, and she will often be, or he will often be a preventive conservator. They can be employed for both large and small-scale projects. They can plan and budget for packing and storing collections. They can pack collections and support staff who may not have knowledge of the possible impact of the work being carried out. The conservator can help facilitate the contract and communicate daily with the project team. They monitor the work of the contractors and other professionals to ensure that they are maintaining good working practices, and they have the authority to stop the work if collections or historic surfaces are at risk. A major consideration is whether collection should be removed or stored on site. Major structural works to a building may expose collections to such a high risk that it's better to remove them. But clearing a room or a building gives professionals clear access for their work, but at the same time there is a risk of items getting damaged when moved or lost through poor documentation. Moving and transporting collections can be time-consuming and costly. For small-scale works, collections can easily be stored on-site. But whether items are stored on-site or off-site, we need to assess the amount of space that's going to be required. It may be possible to use another room in the building. At Wallington, a temporary store is erected in the main hall. Temporary racking, temporary intruder alarms, and environmental control can all be installed. If collections are going to be stored off-site, we draw up a specification for the store. But buildings are at greatest risk of fire when contractors are on site, as history has shown, especially if hot works are taking place, such as lead works. There is also the possibility of water damage, not only by fires being put out, but if work has been carried out to a roof or if a sprinkler system has not been properly installed. While I was still a new conservator at the National Trust in about 2001, work was being carried out to the roof at Poleston Lacey. A temporary roof was erected, but before this happened, the house manager and I tried to insist that the contractors purchase emergency supplies in case water got in through the temporary roof during periods of heavy rain. And you know what's going to happen. The supplies were thought to be too expensive and were removed from the budget. One evening, however, there was torrential rain, and a member of staff checking the building found water pouring in. The water was flowing towards one of the tapestries. She quickly released the tapestry and managed to stop it getting damaged. And after this, the contractor was asked to provide emergency supplies, particularly absorbent materials. So it's vital to revise emergency plans, noting where collections have moved to. It's also important to ensure that there are adequate supplies of emergency materials on site. Emergency routes need to be clearly marked for contractors who may not know the site. And here we see one of the temporary emergency points installed for contractors working at Stirling Castle. But protection from fire includes controlling hot works and using alternative methods where possible. Temporary smoke alarms and fire alarms should be installed, and flame retardant materials used for protection, particularly along fire exit routes, as seen here. To protect from theft, temporary security systems can be installed, and work should be supervised and access restricted only to the areas necessary. Contractors should be issued with official identification. But I'm now going to describe practical measures that can be used to protect collections and interiors from largely impact damage and damage from dust and other pollutants during small and large projects. The level of protection should be proportionate to the risk. Too much protection can hinder the work, but too little will result in damage. In the image on the slide, we can see protection being installed. The protective materials are used to protect the floor, stairs and banisters, and winter case covers placed on chairs. But the requirement for in-situ protection is considered in the planning stages. Vulnerable surfaces and collections which cannot be moved are identified, and the risks presented by the planned works are assessed, and the appropriate level of protection installed. So dust sheets can be used to protect furniture from dust and dirt. If there's a small risk of impact damage, anti-knocks, a polypropylene board, can be used for protection. And if there's a risk of major impact damage, protection may be solid plywood. And the protection can be specified in the tender documents. Protection should never be attached directly to historic surfaces. Adhesive tape should never be used, and even low-tack tape can be damaging if left in place too long. Here we see in situ protection of a mirror. Plywood is used in the first two images. Plywood is used to protect up to shoulder height, and then polypropylene board above. The protection is braced and wedged into position. In the image on the right, acid-free tissue is placed over curtains to protect them from dust. Here, glass-fronted display cases are protected using, again, polypropylene sheets. The columns are protected using sheets of acid-free tissue and then bubble wrap taped to itself. And the floor has been protected using hardboard with Tyvek, which is woven polyester, underneath. So staircases can be protected in various ways. On the left, the steps have been protected using plywood to provide protection against heavy use. And in the center, the historic carpet has been removed and cheap carpet has been installed instead. The banisters have been protected by covering first in polyester wadding and then polypropylene board, kept in place with electrical ties. The door on the right has again been protected using polypropylene board. At Stirling Castle, when major structural repairs were carried out, doorways were protected from impact damage using plywood, and heavy-duty plastic sheeting reduced the amount of debris getting through to the adjacent areas, and chimney pieces were boxed in. External steps were covered in exterior-grade plywood and archways similarly boarded. Information panels telling the public about the work can be installed on the boarding. In the last few minutes, I'm going to describe some of the measures taken at Knole, a National Trust property. A major programme of works phased over several years began last year. In advance of work starting, I was asked to visit to give general advice on in-situ protection for the interiors and the collection. And I was also asked to calculate the amount of space required to store the collection in another building on the site, and to make recommendations for the layout of the temporary store. In some areas, all that has been required are simple dust sheets. Sometimes the winter case covers have been used, and at other times, Tyvek, the woven polyester cloth, has been draped over large pieces of furniture. Here, textiles have been rolled on carpet rollers and plastic drain pipes, and then wrapped in Tyvek and stored in the room. The large four-poster bed has been boxed in. For boxing in, plywood can be used. If it's going to be boxed in for a long time, we either use marine plywood or zero formaldehyde medium density fiberboard, Medite, which off-gases far less than ordinary plywood, so releases fewer pollutants into the atmosphere. To the right of the bed, a dust screen has been erected using translucent flame-retardant polythene stapled to a wooden frame. For the first phase, an external scaffold was erected for work to the windows and external stone repairs. The protective walkway helps to ensure that dust and grit created by the work is not transferred into the historic rooms. A simple but effective dust screen was erected at the end of the cartoon gallery. But just to briefly summarize, the potential damage that can be caused by professionals can be prevented and risks reduced by employing the methods and practices I've described, by specifying the work and installing appropriate protection. Risks can be reduced through careful planning and programming, and through appointing experienced and suitably qualified professionals. I'd like to thank Katie Lithgow, Head Conservator at the National Trust, and co-author of the chapter in the accompanying publication, which I'm really looking forward to seeing, and the National Trust and the photographers for many of the photographs. And thank you.